The great hall of the alien palace was vast and filled with a strange golden light that seemed to glow from the walls themselves. The floor was smooth and reflective like glass, yet warm under the feet of those who walked across it. Tall pillars rose high into the air, carved with moving symbols that shifted like living streams of water. Soldiers in armor that shone like dark stone stood motionless along the edges, their weapons glowing faintly with an energy hum that echoed faintly through the chamber. At the far end, on a throne that looked grown rather than built, sat the alien queen. The human delegation entered with slow and careful steps. They had been warned many times before arriving that any sign of disrespect, even the smallest mistake in posture or tone, could be taken as an insult. The aliens had lived in power across the stars for thousands of years, long before humans had even learned to send signals into space. Now humanity stood at the edge of something that could either save their struggling worlds or destroy them completely. Among the delegation was a man named Daniel Hayes. He was not the leader of the mission. He was not even the most skilled diplomat. He was a translator, trained in both human language and the alien tongue, chosen because of his strange talent for understanding patterns and meanings where others heard only noise. Daniel had no desire to stand out. His task was simple: to assist in communication, to make sure no word was lost in translation. Yet as he looked toward the throne, he felt his breath catch in his throat. The alien queen was unlike anything he had ever imagined. Her form was tall, elegant, and powerful, clothed in flowing material that shimmered between colors as she moved. Her eyes were luminous, deep pools that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Her presence was overwhelming, and yet there was a kind of sadness in her gaze, as if centuries of leadership had placed a heavy weight upon her spirit. She was beautiful in a way that was not human, not even close, but Daniel could not deny the strange pull he felt when he looked at her. The head diplomat, Ambassador Roth, began the formal greeting, his voice steady but cautious. He bowed low, as they had been instructed, and spoke the words of respect in the alien tongue. Daniel translated the response as the queen spoke, her voice like music, yet edged with authority. The exchange was calm, careful, measured by ritual and tradition. Every phrase carried meaning, and Daniel kept his focus, though his eyes kept drifting back to her. He noticed the way she studied the humans. Her gaze was sharp, not cruel, but assessing, as if weighing their worth. Her people believed themselves far above humanity, stronger, wiser, older. To them, Earth was still young and fragile. The delegation had come to negotiate trade, protection, and recognition. But as Daniel translated, he began to sense something else beneath her words. An unspoken question, a quiet searching. The talks lasted for hours. Gifts were exchanged, promises discussed, and tensions carefully avoided. Finally, as the meeting ended, the humans were led out of the hall. Daniel walked behind the others, his thoughts restless. He had felt something unusual when the queen's eyes lingered on him. It was brief, almost accidental, but it had shaken him. He should not have felt that way, he told himself. She was a monarch of an empire that stretched across thousands of stars. He was a single man from a small world. Yet as he walked, he whispered under his breath, so quietly, he thought no one could possibly hear, "I wish I could marry her." The words were not meant for anyone else. They were nothing but the passing dream of a man overwhelmed by beauty and mystery. But in the silence of the great hall, with its strange glowing walls that carried sound in ways no human could understand, the whisper traveled further than he expected. The queen's head turned. Slowly, with deliberate grace, she looked back at him. Daniel froze in horror, his face turning pale. Had she heard? Impossible, he thought. It had been only a whisper. But her eyes locked on his, and for the briefest moment, the hall seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a voice soft but clear, she spoke. "My answer is yes." The words struck him like thunder. The other humans did not hear them, or if they did, they thought it was some phrase in the alien tongue beyond their understanding. Daniel's heart raced, his mouth went dry. She had spoken directly to him, Not to the delegation, not to the ambassador, but to him alone. He lowered his head quickly, pretending to adjust his translation device, hiding the storm of emotion on his face. He could not understand why she had said that. Was it mockery? Was it a mistake? Or had she somehow impossibly understood his whisper? The humans left the hall and were escorted to their quarters within the alien city. Daniel barely spoke, his mind spinning with confusion. That night, he sat by the window of the guest chamber, staring out at the alien skyline. Towers of living metal curved into the clouds. Glowing veins of light pulsed through the streets below, and ships moved silently across the horizon like shadows of silver. Yet none of it held his attention. He could think only of her. My answer is yes. He replayed the moment over and over. What had she meant? Why had she answered something he should never have said aloud? And why had her voice carried no mockery? No judgment? Only certainty? Daniel tried to convince himself it was a misunderstanding, some strange trick of sound. But deep inside, he felt something different. Something he could not explain. A thread had been tied between them, invisible but unbreakable. The next day, the delegation resumed their negotiations. Daniel performed his role as expected, his voice steady, his translations accurate. But whenever the Queen spoke, her eyes flickered toward him, subtle but undeniable. No one else seemed to notice. To the others, she was distant, regal, untouchable. But to him, her gaze carried weight, as though she were speaking a second language only he could hear. By the third day, Daniel could no longer ignore it. During a recess in the talks, as the hall emptied and the humans stepped outside, he lingered behind, his heart pounding. The Queen remained seated on her throne, her guards silent and still. Slowly, carefully, Daniel bowed and dared to raise his voice. "Your Majesty," he said, his words trembling. "May I ask, why did you say that to me yesterday?" Her luminous eyes fixed on him. For a long moment she did not answer. The silence pressed against him like a weight. Then at last, she spoke. "Because you asked with truth in your heart." Daniel's breath caught. She had heard him. She had truly heard him. He tried to explain, to apologize, to insist it had been a mistake, only a whisper of foolishness, but she raised her hand and silenced him with a gesture. "I have been surrounded by voices for centuries," she said, her tone calm but edged with something deeper. "Voices of ambition, of greed, of fear. You spoke with none of these. Your words were simple, honest. In them I heard no strategy, no deceit. I heard only longing. Do you know how rare that is in this galaxy?" Daniel stood frozen, his mind unable to form an answer. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze unblinking. "You are human," she continued. "Your people are young, reckless, fragile, and yet you see me not as a weapon, not as a ruler, not as a prize. You see me as someone you wish to stand beside. Do you think that's strange?" "Yes," Daniel whispered, his throat dry. "It is strange and impossible." "Perhaps," she said softly, "but the impossible has always been where truth begins." At that moment, Daniel felt the universe shift. He had come as a translator, a nameless figure among greater men. Now he stood in the presence of a queen who had lived longer than entire nations of Earth, and she had chosen to answer the whisper of his heart. He knew nothing of what would follow, of what storms this bond would awaken, of the dangers and the betrayals to come. All he knew was that the world he had left behind was already gone, and something new, something vast and terrifying and beautiful, had begun. The following days passed slowly, though Daniel felt every moment move like a storm around him. The delegation continued their careful meetings with the alien court, discussing trade routes, protection treaties, and the future of human colonies. The ambassadors were focused, the generals cautious, and the politicians restless. But Daniel could not focus on any of it. His mind kept returning to the Queen's words. My answer is yes. It was impossible to forget. Even when he tried to drown himself in work, even when he forced his voice to remain steady during translation, the memory returned with power. Sometimes he thought he had imagined it. Perhaps he had been tired, or the hall's strange acoustics had played tricks on his mind. But then she would look at him, just a glance, a flicker of her luminous eyes across the chamber, and the truth struck him again. She had heard him. She had chosen to answer. That secret weighed heavily on him. He dared not tell the others. If he spoke the truth, they would laugh at him or call him a fool. Worse, they might think he had been compromised, manipulated by the Queen in some unknown game. Humanity trusted very little when it came to the aliens, and for good reason. Their empire had been built not only on wisdom, but also on power, and they were known for bending weaker races to their will. If the ambassadors suspected he had become close to her, they would remove him from the delegation, perhaps even lock him away as a threat. And yet the thought of never hearing her voice again terrified him more than any punishment they could give. On the fourth evening, as the humans were escorted back to their chambers, Daniel paused at the edge of the great hall. He turned his head slightly and saw her still seated on the throne. For the first time, she was not surrounded by nobles or advisors. Only 2 guards remained, standing silent as statues. She was alone, her gaze lifted toward the ceiling as though she were watching stars beyond the palace roof. Daniel hesitated. Every part of his training told him to move on, to stay with his people, to remain invisible as he had always been. But his feet betrayed him. Slowly, quietly, he stepped away from the delegation and into the shadow of a side passage. The guards did not stop him. Perhaps they thought him unimportant. Perhaps they had been told not to interfere. He waited until the humans had gone, until the great doors closed. Then, gathering courage he did not know he possessed, he stepped forward into the hall. His footsteps echoed lightly on the shining floor. The Queen turned her head. Her luminous eyes met his, and though she did not speak at once, he felt her attention strike him like a current of electricity. "You linger," she said softly. Daniel bowed his head, his throat tight. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, I wish to thank you." Her eyes narrowed slightly, though not in anger. "Thank me? For what?" "For your kindness," he said, though the words felt clumsy on his tongue. "For answering me, even though you had no reason to." The hall was quiet. The light from the walls shimmered faintly, casting her figure in gold and silver. Finally, she rose from her throne. The movement was fluid, elegant, but carried weight. She walked down the steps toward him, each step echoing like the toll of a distant bell. When she stopped before him, she stood taller by more than a head. Yet her presence did not crush him. Instead, it felt as though she carried a shield of warmth, something that softened the cold vastness of the hall. "I answered," she said, "because you spoke with truth. Few dare to be honest before me. Even fewer are capable of honesty with themselves. You whispered a desire, believing it would vanish unheard. But I heard, and I chose to answer, because I wished to see what would happen next." Daniel swallowed. His voice trembled as he asked, "And what do you see now?" The Queen studied him for a long moment. Her gaze was sharp, but beneath it lay something quieter, something that almost resembled curiosity. "I see a man who is afraid of his own heart," she said at last. "You fear what you feel, and yet you cannot deny it. You think it is foolish, impossible, and yet, here you stand." Daniel's chest tightened. "Because I don't understand. You are a queen, the ruler of 1,000 worlds. I am only a translator." Her lips curved into something that might have been a smile, though faint and difficult to read. "Titles matter little in the face of truth. Do you believe me greater than you simply because I sit upon a throne?" "Yes," Daniel admitted quietly, "but I also believe you are lonely." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He froze, horrified by his own boldness. But instead of anger, The queen's eyes softened. "You see much," she whispered. Silence followed. The sound of their breathing seemed loud in the vast chamber. Daniel's heart raced, and for the first time he felt as though he had stepped into something far larger than himself, something that could not be undone. At last, she spoke again, her voice lower now, almost tender. "Tell me, Daniel Hayes, of Earth, if my answer was not jest, if my words carried truth, would you still wish what you whispered?" His breath caught. The question hung in the air, heavier than stone, brighter than fire. He knew the danger in answering. To admit it was madness, to deny it would be a lie. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, his voice unsteady but clear. "Yes." The queen regarded him, her gaze unreadable. Then she turned and walked slowly back toward her throne. "Then let us see," she said softly, "where this path will lead." The following days were unlike any Daniel had ever lived. Though the formal talks continued, an unspoken bond now lingered between him and the queen. Their eyes met across the chamber more often than before. Sometimes during recess, she would send subtle questions to him through her advisors, questions that seemed ordinary but carried hidden meaning. Other times she would allow a flicker of expression to escape her perfect mask of authority, a hint of warmth, a trace of amusement that only he noticed. But with that bond came danger. Whispers spread through the alien court. Noble houses began to murmur of strange favoritism, of the queen's unusual attention toward a human. Some of the human delegation also grew suspicious. One evening, as Daniel returned to his chamber, Ambassador Roth confronted him privately. "You've drawn attention," Roth said in a low voice. "Dangerous attention. The queen's court is watching you, and so are we." Daniel tried to feign confusion, but Roth's sharp eyes cut through his act. "You're not here to make history, Hayes," Roth continued. "You're here to translate. Nothing more. If you let this, whatever it is, you'd interfere with the mission, I will have you removed. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Daniel said quietly. But in his heart he knew it was already too late. That night, sleep would not come. He sat once more by the window, staring at the alien skyline, wondering how a single whisper had changed the course of his life. He knew the danger, he knew the risk, and yet he also knew that for the first time in his life he felt truly seen, not as a translator, not as a tool, not as a shadow behind greater men, but as himself. And that truth was worth every risk. The tension in the palace grew heavier with each passing day. What had begun as whispers in the shadows now grew louder, spreading like fire through both alien and human circles. Some nobles claimed the queen was showing weakness. Some humans believed Daniel had betrayed his duty. Even the guards seemed to stand a little closer, their eyes colder whenever Daniel entered the hall. Daniel felt the pressure like chains around his chest. He continued his role as translator with steady voice and calm face, but every step he took carried the weight of suspicion. When he returned to the delegation's chambers, silence often followed him, as if the others no longer trusted him fully. Ambassador Roth spoke less to him, giving him sharp glances when he thought Daniel wasn't watching. The other humans treated him with polite distance, no longer sharing easy words or light laughter. But when Daniel entered the queen's presence, all of that vanished. Her gaze would meet his, and for a few moments the storm of suspicion faded. She never spoke openly of what bound them together, never gave the court any reason to accuse her directly. But in the quiet spaces between formal words, in the stillness of her eyes when they met his, Daniel knew she had not forgotten. One evening, the negotiations were interrupted by a sudden alarm. The walls of the great hall pulsed with crimson light, and the alien guards raised their weapons. Voices shouted in their own language, and the human delegation huddled together in fear. Daniel struggled to understand the rapid words, but soon, the meaning was clear. There had been an attack inside the palace. The queen rose from her throne, her movements sharp but controlled. She gave orders to her guards, who moved swiftly to secure the hall. Daniel felt his heart pound in his chest. He knew danger when he saw it, And this was no ordinary disturbance. A group of armored figures broke through the far doors, their faces hidden, their weapons glowing. The guards rushed to intercept them, but the intruders fought with desperate fury. Energy clashed against energy, light bursting across the hall in violent flashes. The humans cowered, unarmed and helpless, while Daniel stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the queen. She remained calm, her figure tall and steady, even as chaos erupted around her. But Daniel saw the danger. One of the intruders broke past the line of guards, rushing straight toward her throne. Without thinking, Daniel moved. He ran forward, his body driven by something greater than fear. The intruder raised his weapon, but Daniel collided with him, shoving him off balance. The two crashed to the floor, the weapon clattering across the polished stone. The alien attacker was stronger, but Daniel fought with desperate energy, grappling, clawing, refusing to let go. The queen's guards finally reached them, pulling the attacker away and striking him down with swift blows. Daniel lay on the floor, his breath ragged, his arms trembling from the struggle. Slowly, he looked up and saw the queen standing above him. Her eyes, bright as stars, met his. For a moment, the entire hall seemed to fall silent. "You placed yourself between me and death," she said softly, though her voice carried across the chamber. Daniel tried to speak, but only managed to whisper, "I couldn't let them. I couldn't lose you." The queen's gaze did not waver. She raised her hand, and for the first time before the entire court, she offered it to him. Slowly, Daniel reached up and took it. She pulled him to his feet, and the hall erupted with shocked murmurs. From that moment, everything changed. The humans whispered among themselves that Daniel had acted recklessly, risking the mission by throwing himself into combat. Some even suspected he had staged the attack, though there was no evidence. The alien nobles, however, were far louder in their outrage. To them, the sight of their queen holding hands with a human, raising him before her people, was unthinkable. That night, Daniel was summoned privately by the queen. He walked through long corridors of Livingstone, guided by silent guards, until he entered her private chamber. The room was smaller than the great hall, though still vast by human standards. The walls glowed with a softer light, and a large window revealed the endless city beyond. The queen stood by the window, her cloak flowing like liquid light. She turned when he entered, her eyes steady. "You have made a choice," she said. "Do you understand the cost?" Daniel bowed his head. "Yes, they already think I am disloyal. They may remove me from the mission, or worse. But I don't regret it. I would do it again." The queen studied him for a long time. "Among my people, strength is shown not only in battle but in sacrifice. Today, you showed both. Some will hate you for it. Others will fear you. But all will remember it." He stepped closer, his voice low. "And you? What will you remember?" Her gaze softened, just slightly. "That a man of Earth chose my life over his own, with no thought of reward. That is not something easily forgotten." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to speak more, to tell her the truth of everything he felt. But before he could, the doors opened again. A group of alien nobles entered, their faces grim. They bowed, deeply before their queen, though their eyes flickered with suspicion toward Daniel. One of them spoke in their language, his voice sharp. Daniel understood enough to catch the meaning. They were demanding that she remove him, that he was a danger, a distraction unworthy of standing near her. The queen listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When they finished, she rose to her full height. "This human saved my life," she declared. While others watched, he acted. "He has earned his place at my side." The nobles stiffened, their faces dark with outrage, but none dared to argue further. They bowed again and left the chamber, their anger hidden but not gone. When they were gone, Daniel turned to her. "You defended me." "I spoke the truth," she said simply. He shook his head. "You put yourself in danger. They will not forgive this." Her voice grew quiet, though it carried strength. "Let them hate. I am their queen, not their servant. And you, You are no longer only a translator. You are now a symbol. Daniel felt the weight of her words settle over him. He had never wanted to be a symbol. He had never wanted attention or power. Yet now he carried both, and there was no way to turn back. The days that followed were harder than any before. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the queen had chosen him as her consort already, though no such declaration had been made. Others whispered that the humans had planned the attack as a way to place him closer to her. Both sides of the delegation grew restless, suspicion growing thicker each day. But in the quiet moments when Daniel and the queen found brief time away from watching eyes, their bond grew stronger. They spoke of their worlds, of the vast differences, and the surprising similarities. She told him of the weight of ruling, of the loneliness that came with power. He told her of Earth's struggles, of small victories, of laughter and music and hope. Slowly, what had begun as a whispered wish became something real, something neither of them could deny. And yet with every passing day the danger grew. The bond they had forged was not only between two hearts, it was now a crack in the walls of two civilizations. A single choice could unite them or tear them apart, and deep within the palace, in the hidden places where light did not reach, enemies sharpened their blades, waiting for the moment to strike again. The palace felt different after the attack. Guards patrolled every corridor, their glowing weapons always ready. Whispers filled the air, and every noble eye seemed to watch Daniel like a hawk. Yet despite the suspicion, despite the danger, his bond with the queen only deepened. Their private meetings became more frequent, sometimes only for a few stolen minutes between councils, sometimes longer in the quiet hours of the night when the halls grew still. She would dismiss her attendants, and he would step into her chamber, his heart racing each time. The window, behind her throne, always glowed with the endless city lights, and in that soft glow, her regal mask would slip away. She told him of her youth, of the day she was crowned, not because she wanted power, but because her bloodline demanded it. She spoke of centuries of duty, of always being surrounded by advisors, generals, and nobles, yet never truly being seen as a person. Daniel listened, his eyes fixed on her, and in her voice he heard a loneliness that matched the one he had always carried quietly inside himself. He told her of Earth, not the polished words of diplomats, but the simple truths. He spoke of small villages where people laughed by firelight, of oceans that stretched farther than sight, of children chasing each other through streets with joy brighter than any throne room. She listened, her eyes softening as though she could see those things through his words. One night, after a long silence, she asked him the question that had hung between them since the beginning. "Would you stay here?" she said softly. "If I asked it of you, would you leave your world behind and stand at my side?" The question froze him. He had imagined it many times, but hearing it aloud struck him like lightning. His first thought was yes, spoken deep within his heart. But then doubt followed. He thought of Earth, of his people, of the fragile place humanity held in the galaxy. If he chose her, would his people call him a traitor? Would they see his love as betrayal? He swallowed hard. If I said yes, would Earth forgive me? The queen's luminous eyes lowered, her expression unreadable. Perhaps not. But sometimes, love demands a price. Sometimes the stars do not allow us to have both duty and desire. He looked at her, torn between two worlds. He wanted to tell her that he would give up everything just to stand beside her. But the thought of abandoning his people gnawed at him. He had always been ordinary, unnoticed, a simple translator. Yet now he carried the weight of something larger than himself. Their moment was interrupted by the sudden arrival of her chief advisor, a tall noble with a sharp voice and colder eyes. He bowed deeply, but wasted no time. "My queen," the advisor said. "The council grows restless. They demand clarity. This human's presence has caused division. Some speak of rebellion if he is not removed." The queen's face hardened, her regal mask returning in an instant. "Let them speak," she said firmly. "I am their queen, not their servant." But Daniel saw the truth behind her eyes. She was strong, but even strength had limits. Her empire was vast, filled with ambitious houses that waited only for weakness. By choosing him, she risked not only her throne but also her people. The advisor's gaze flickered to Daniel, sharp with disdain. "Your Majesty, with respect, this path will destroy everything. He cannot remain." The queen lifted her chin. "He stays. This is my decision." The advisor's jaw tightened, but he bowed again, though Daniel could feel the anger burning beneath his obedience. When he was gone, Daniel turned to her, his voice low. "They will not stop. They will come. For me again. Maybe for you too." She looked at him, her expression calm but her voice quiet. "I have faced rebellions before. I have faced wars. But never have I faced this choice. For the first time, my throne feels less heavy and more dangerous. And still, I do not regret it." Her words struck deep. Daniel wanted to take her hand, to promise her that no matter what came, he would not leave. But fear still whispered in his mind. The next day, the human delegation also confronted him. Ambassador Roth called him into a private chamber, his face grim. "You've crossed a line, Hayes," Roth said. "Whatever is happening between you and the Queen, it must end. Do you understand? Our people see it as weakness. The aliens see it as insult. You're going to cost us everything." Daniel tried to argue. "I saved her life. I didn't plan for any of this. But what I feel, it's real." Roth slammed his hand on the table. "Real? She is an alien monarch, and you are one man. Do you think Earth can afford to be ruled by your heart? We are on the edge of survival, Hayes. One mistake, and humanity is ash. Do not let your foolishness be that mistake." The words cut deep, but Daniel did not back down. His voice was steady, even as his heart pounded. "Maybe it's not foolishness. Maybe this is the first chance Earth has to be more than ash. Maybe, if we show them that love can bridge the stars, they will see us differently." Roth's eyes narrowed. "Or maybe they'll see us as weak. And then, Hayes, we'll all pay the price." When Daniel left the chamber, his chest ached. He felt torn in two directions between his love for the Queen and his duty to humanity. Both pulled at him, both demanded sacrifice. That night, he walked the palace corridors alone, his thoughts heavy. The city outside glowed with endless lights, yet he felt surrounded by darkness. He found himself standing once more before the Queen's chamber door. The guards let him pass without question. She stood by the window, her cloak shimmering. When she saw him, she stepped closer. "You are troubled," she said softly. He nodded, his voice low. "They want me gone. Both your people and mine. They think we're dangerous together." Her hand reached out, brushing lightly against his. "And what do you think?" Daniel's throat tightened. "I think I can't walk away from you, but I also can't abandon my people. I don't know how to choose." The Queen's eyes searched his face, her voice quiet but filled with strength. "Then perhaps the choice is not yours alone. Perhaps it is ours. Together." Silence filled the chamber. Outside, the alien city stretched endlessly, a sea of light against the void. Inside, two hearts from different worlds stood on the edge of a decision that would shape the fate of both species. And in the darkness beyond the city walls, enemies sharpened their plans. They would strike soon, not only at Daniel, but at the Queen herself, determined to tear apart the bond that threatened the balance of the stars. The palace was quiet that night, but it was the kind of silence that warned of storms. The halls glowed softly with their living light. The guards stood in their usual positions, and yet something in the air felt wrong. Daniel could feel it in his chest, a restless beat that refused to calm. He sat in his chamber, unable to sleep. The voices of both humans and aliens echoed in his mind. The warnings, the accusations, the demands that he leave. He knew the truth now. Neither side would accept his bond with the Queen. Not the nobles who feared their Queen's power would weaken, and not the humans who believed he was betraying Earth. Only she stood with him, and he with her. He rose from his bed and went to the window. The alien city stretched endlessly, glowing veins of light weaving through towers that rose like mountains. But beneath the beauty, Daniel felt the weight of eyes watching, waiting. He knew an attack would come. He knew their enemies would not remain patient much longer, and he was right. The attack came just before dawn. Alarms echoed through the palace, sharp and loud. Guards rushed through the corridors, shouting orders in their language. From the windows, Daniel saw ships darting across the sky, black shapes moving like shadows against the light. Explosions cracked in the distance, and the city's protective shields flared with sparks. He ran into the corridor, only to be stopped by alien soldiers. "Stay here," one of them barked. But Daniel shoved past, his fear for the queen stronger than his fear for his own life. He sprinted through the halls, following the sound of battle. The great hall was chaos. Armed rebels, nobles who had turned against their ruler, had forced their way inside with soldiers loyal only to them. The queen stood on the steps of her throne, her cloak flowing like fire, her voice carrying commands as her loyal guards fought desperately to protect her. Daniel's heart pounded as he rushed forward. One of the rebels broke through the line, raising a weapon toward her. Without thinking, Daniel grabbed a fallen guard's blade. It was heavy and strange in his hands, glowing faintly with alien energy, but he swung it with every ounce of strength he had. The strike collided with the rebel's weapon, sparks bursting. Daniel staggered, but he did not fall. The rebel turned on him, surprised to see a human standing in his way. "You do not belong here," the attacker snarled in broken English. Daniel gritted his teeth. "I belong with her." They clashed, the sound of their weapons ringing across the hall. Daniel was weaker, slower, but desperation gave him strength. At the last moment, he managed to shove the rebel back just enough for the queen's guards to strike him down. The queen's eyes met Daniel's through the chaos. For an instant, everything else disappeared. The rebels, the shouting, the battle. It was only her and him, two hearts bound by something greater than fear. But the danger was far from over. More rebels stormed into the hall, their weapons glowing bright. The queen's loyalists fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. The rebels shouted of ending her rule, of saving the empire from her weakness. Daniel knew they meant to kill her. He ran to her side, his chest heaving. "They won't stop," he gasped. "They'll never stop until—" "Until what?" she asked, her voice calm even in the storm. "Until we prove them wrong," he said. "Until we show them that what we have is not weakness." The queen looked at him, her luminous eyes filled with something fierce and unshakable. She raised her hand high and her voice rang out across the hall. "Enough." The rebels froze for a moment, their weapons still raised. Her voice was not a plea but a command, one that carried centuries of rule. "You call me weak because I chose him," she declared, her arm pointing toward Daniel. "You call me unfit because I see value in a man of earth. But look at him. He stood before death for me not once but twice. While you plot in shadows, he acts with courage. While you whisper lies, he speaks with truth. Tell me, who among you has given as much?" The hall was silent except for the crackle of weapons. The queen stepped closer to Daniel, her voice steady. "This man is not my weakness. He is my strength. He is proof that our empire can change, that it can grow beyond fear and pride. And if you would strike him down, then you will strike me down as well. For I will not stand without him." Daniel felt his throat tighten. The words hit him harder than any blade could. She had chosen not in whispers, not in secret, but before the eyes of all. The rebels roared in anger, charging forward. But the queen's guards rallied with renewed fury, their blades flashing brighter than before. Daniel fought at their side, every strike fueled by the knowledge that he was no longer fighting only for survival but for her, for them, for the bond that tied their worlds together. The battle raged until at last the rebels were driven back, defeated, their weapons clattering, to the ground. The survivors were dragged away, their cries echoing down the halls. Silence fell. The queen stood tall, her chest rising with calm breaths. She looked at her people, both the loyal and the fallen, and then at Daniel. Slowly, she took his hand in hers and lifted it high. "This human is my chosen," she declared. "Not as a servant, not as a tool, but as my equal. Together we will guide our worlds into a new future." If any oppose this, let them speak now. No one spoke. Even those who had doubted her lowered their heads. The hall was filled not with rebellion but with awe. Daniel stood trembling, his hand still in hers. His heart pounded so hard he thought, it might break. He had never dreamed this moment would come, never believed his whispered words would lead here. And yet here he was, standing beside the queen as her chosen, not in secret but in truth. Later, when the battle was over and the palace had calmed, Daniel and the queen stood together on the balcony overlooking the endless city. Ships drifted silently across the skies and the stars shone beyond, endless and bright. He turned to her, his voice low. I thought I'd lost everything. My people, my place, my future. But you gave it back to me. Her luminous eyes softened. No, Daniel, you gave it to me. For the first time in centuries, I do not feel alone. He swallowed hard. And what now? She lifted her hand, resting it lightly against his cheek. Now, we build a new path. Together. And then, as the city lights glowed and the stars stretched forever into the dark, the man from Earth and the queen of 1,000 worlds stood side by side, no longer whispering, no longer hiding. Their union was not just love, it was hope. Hope that two hearts, though born on different worlds, could change the destiny of galaxies. And for the first time, Daniel truly believed that humanity had a place among the stars.